Good afternoon, and welcome to Advocacy Anywhere, powered by American Jewish Committee, the global advocacy organization for the Jewish people. Advocacy Anywhere is AJC's digital platform that enables you to engage with AJC's global expertise, content, and advocacy from wherever you are. For the past few years, schools have been increasingly at the center of national debates over free expression, identity, and historical narratives. Students are engaged in a broader discussion about education. Considering the heightened and polarized zeitgeist, the skyrocketing rise of anti Semitism of the past 2 years, and the ongoing war in the Middle East, educators are reluctant to engage in contentious topics. How then can educators create spaces where students learn to engage deeply and respectfully with one another across lines of difference? Joining us today for this timely and essential conversation is Dr. John Austin, head of schools at Deerfield Academy in Deerfield, Massachusetts, and author of Thriving in a World of Pluralistic Contention, a Framework for Schools. Drawing on his leadership and scholarship, Dr. Austin will share how schools can foster civic discourse and cultures of open inquiry that prepare students to navigate complexity with courage and empathy. Today's program, designed for educators and administrators, is also open to the broader public. We're grateful you could join us. Moderating today's conversation will be Aaron Bregman, AJC's Director of High School Affairs, and Ira Glasser, AJC's Director of K-12 Education in New York. Both are leaders in AJC's Center for Education Advocacy, which works to shape a new future for education by ensuring that educational spaces reject the normalization of anti-Semitism in any form, are inclusive of Jews and Jewish identity, and are grounded in critical thinking, fact-based inquiry, and democratic values. After we hear from Dr. Austin, time permitting, we will open the floor to your questions. Please use the Q&A feature in Zoom at any time to submit your questions. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Austin.
Amazing. Thank you, Hannah. Welcome, Dr. Austin. Thank you for joining us today. We certainly hope the school year is off to a great start. Again, for everyone, I'm Aaron Bregman. Before we dive in, and for the sake of creating a shared understanding, we were hoping that you could please provide a brief overview of Thriving in a World of Pluralistic Contention and its origin story.
Great. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm grateful for the invitation, and I hope I can be useful to all the educators and teachers on this call. So we published the framework, the shorthand that we used last May. We wanted to get it out prior to the election. I should say that I was the draft person for the framework, but it was actually created through a series of ongoing conversations among a group of heads of school from throughout the country. We wanted to bring together a diverse range of schools and heads of school to get their perspectives. And I'll summarize it very, very briefly if I can. So in the framework, we make the case for what we call academic pluralism. And that idea rests on two assumptions. The first is that teaching and learning are distinct from political advocacy, activism, and political movements. And that's kind of the academic part of it. The idea that schools are first and foremost places of curiosity, of learning, of inquiry, of wonder, and exploration. So that's the academic piece. The second assumption is that schools inevitably serve diverse populations across a broad spectrum of identities, backgrounds, political orientations, religious beliefs, and personal values, and that this is a source of tremendous strength for our schools if we can properly shape it and harness it in the service of young people. So that's the pluralism part. And more concretely, what the framework does is it advances 3 principles and 6 norms in support of academic pluralism. The ideal of educating for expressive freedom, which it defines across the axis of courageous, tolerant, and conscientious expression. Disciplined nonpartisanship as both an institutional posture and an instructional aspiration. And lastly, intellectual diversity as a design principle for how schools can think about program and curriculum. So that's kind of the framework in 3 short paragraphs.
Thank you for that. Yeah, no, very helpful in terms of contextualizing it. So you published the framework in May of 2024, so months after schools are already struggling to respond to rising, issues of anti-Semitism and the ripple effects of obviously October 7th. So I guess since then, what kind of reception has the framework received, and really what changes, whether at Deerfield or across other independent schools, have you observed as leaders begin to engage with those sort of principles that you laid out?
Yeah. So, the purpose of it was to really to frame a conversation, to create space for conversation and to provide schools and teachers and heads of school and even trustees a framework against which they could think. And it's not meant to be prescriptive. We really wanted to present it in such a way that it was clear and had some clear principles, but we also wanted each school to take it and to use it in a way that's in keeping with their missions, with the unique circumstances that every school faces, and their own student bodies that they know much better than any group of heads of school can from the outside. So we really wanted it to be both an invitation and a provocation. And I think it's received a lot of great attention. It's been published on the Edward E. Ford Foundation website, which supported our work. And I've been told by the executive director that it's received more kind of hits than any other project or proposal that they've published. So I think it's gotten a lot of attention. Anecdotally, I've heard from school heads and trustees that they've used it in various kinds of conversations. Some people use it with their faculty. I know some have used it in conversation with their trustees to think about a broader institutional posture. And some have used it with students to get their insights. It's a little long, but so I think in that way it's been helpful and successful because it's elicited a lot of conversation. And in some ways it's part of a broader wave, I think, or a change of tide that's been moving through particularly institutions. I think more and more schools and certainly more and more colleges have adopted versions of what we call discipline nonpartisanship, but what some universities call neutrality or principled neutrality. So I think that idea has taken shape, that posture on the part of schools is an important precondition for opening up debate and discussion on campuses. I think there's been a lot of great conversation around what it means to teach during a moment of heightened polarization and ideological rancor, and now the increasing levels of political violence across the country. So I think it's been a great vehicle for teachers to reflect and think about really the nature of their vocation. So I think in all of those ways, it's been very, very important. And I could talk more about some of the other elements as we move through the conversation.
Thank you.
And actually, I think we're gonna dive a little bit deeper
Great.
on that.
Dive right in.
So you mentioned that the framework encourages schools to foster conscientiousness, to foster courage and tolerance in student speech. And I'm thinking about how might those qualities be nurtured in environments where there are heightened tensions that you mentioned,
Yes.
where fear of social censure often silences student voices.
Yeah. So we've really made an attempt. I mean, I can talk a little bit about our experience here at Deerfield. We've really foregrounded those three norms as really important to the student experience. And we do that in a variety of ways, from orientation through the way we think about student associations and clubs and meetings, through to our programs. But I guess I would emphasize that being clear at the outset with kids about what your aspirations are in terms of how they use language and how they think about intellectual engagement is like crucially important. And we like to think of things in terms of norms rather than kind of rules, right? This is kind of a norm-based approach to speech. And it's one of the wagers of the framework, as it were, is that if, as schools and teachers working together, we can help establish norms of tolerance, that is to say, that the capacity to listen deeply, even to views that you find challenging and difficult, if we can foster a climate in which students feel empowered to ask questions and to overcome the fear they have of mostly peer censure, right? So that there's a climate of robust debate and curiosity, and if we can teach intentionally constructive civic discourse or conscientiousness, if we can help young people understand how language lands on others and how words fall on an audience, right? It's really kind of the art of rhetoric, right? If we can collectively work towards socializing those three norms, when schools inevitably hit these bumps in the road, and where contemporary events come falling down upon us, we'll have in place a kind of a superstructure, right, that will allow the community to come together to talk about difficult things without the danger of it just becoming a dysfunctional, painful experience for kids. And so this is really a norm-based approach. And I think one of the things that's not in the framework that's worth mentioning, at least from my perspective, is that there's a lot of emerging evidence that schools are in a kind of competition with social media and with what Jonathan Haidt calls the phone-based childhood. And the language that's spoken beyond the school and social media is just fundamentally different. It's coarser, it's abbreviated, it doesn't allow for careful thought and thinking. And so one of the things we've tried to do is we've removed phones from the campus to a great extent. And that's freed up kids to connect more with one another. Because I think phones actually depluralize campuses. They isolate kids in their digital bubbles, and they isolate them physically from one another, and they stop conversing and connecting and coming together. And so even as we emphasize constructive dialogue and discourse and do all kinds of things to emphasize it, we've also said, leave your phone, we're a boarding school, leave your phones in your room. And it's freed the kids up in a certain kind of way. And it builds trust among kids when they're interacting face to face rather than online, often anonymously. And so one of the ways I think that schools can repluralize their campuses is by getting control of the digital technologies, which are wonderful in other ways educationally, but which have a huge impact on the quality of the well-being of kids. We know that, but also on the quality of the campus climate.
So I want to take what you've just described, and I want to get to a point where the rubber meets the road.
Okay.
So many educators, and I want to lean into the contentious topics.
Yes.
So many educators and school leaders tell us that they struggle with or even avoid teaching the Israeli-Palestinian conflict because the topic itself can quickly become contentious, and at times it can slip into anti-Semitic rhetoric. How can the framework provide, and if you can go a little bit deeper in talking about a little bit more of the application of this, how can the framework provide a foundation for schools to approach such difficult conversations in a way that encourages rigorous
Yes.
inquiry while maintaining intellectual honesty? So a little bit of this like you've established norms
Yes.
within the school. How does that then let's talk about how that then is then implemented.
Yeah. So the first thing I'd say was I completely understand why teachers might want to avoid contentious issues, particularly something like the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, though there are others that you could think about. And so if there's a faculty member on this call, I would say to them, you're not alone. Like everyone feels this. It's really hard to do. And intellectual diversity is really, really hard to do. I read recently Harvard's report on open inquiry and constructive dialogue, which was authored by a group of faculty at Harvard. And one of the most amazing statistics from that report was that only 49%, less than 1 in 2, instructors at Harvard are comfortable teaching contentious issues on campus. So
Wow.
that suggests to me that we need to think more about how to do this, and I completely understand the lack of or the discomfort, right, that faculty feel, and we need to become more skilled at it. And another of the wagers of the framework, as it were, is that the best way to and I love a phrase that you used with me, Ira, in an earlier conversation. I think you were talking about kind of civic resiliency, right? And how do you build civic resiliency? Well, I think you do that the same way you build athletic skill, through practice, right? So you have to give students time to practice disagreeing. And that comes down, I think, to how you design the student experience. And again, we suggest that structuring disagreement and thinking about curriculum as a series of conversations that you're inviting students to enter, complicated conversations, complex conversations where they admit of more than one possible approach or conclusion, and doing that and enfolding that into the curriculum in a way that they develop their civic resiliency and their civic muscle and their ability to listen and their ability to engage with complexity, right? And a lot of that has to do with how you curate sources and the sources that you bring to the table, and the conversations that you design and create for kids. And I do think that's an area where faculty need to come together and figure it out, and work with one another. And in some ways, taking on the most complex social and political issues of the day, taking them on head on immediately may not always be the best way to develop that kind of civic musculature. You may need to build towards different kinds of conversations. We don't start, ninth graders out in calculus. we start with a foundation, and so you have to think about how you're gonna sequence these things. And I think there's a lot of work we can do here. I read the most interesting thing I've read over the last few months on this question of intellectual diversity, and I think it's worth the audience hearing this, but it was a study. It's a study called Closed Classrooms, an analysis of college syllabi on contentious issues. Some people may have seen this. It's a study from three professors, a working paper from three professors at Scripps College and Claremont McKenna College. And they use a repository of 27 million college syllabi from the Open Syllabus Project. And they want to look at two questions. The first question is, how well are our colleges and universities introducing students to the moral and political controversies that roil modern democratic life? And they have this massive repository of assigned texts and books. And the second question was, are students being exposed to a broad range of intellectual perspectives that give shape to these controversies and illuminate the complexity of the issues at stake? That's the research project. And they examine three controversies and how they're taught. The first is racial bias in the American criminal justice system. The second is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And the third is the ethics of abortion. This is a provisional finding. They could have chosen any number of contentious issues to look at, but their findings were pretty extraordinary. They wrote that, on the whole, professors insulate their students from the wider intellectual disagreement that shape these important controversies, screening students from intellectual disagreement or presenting contested points of view as if they were orthodoxies. I encourage everybody to read the paper and look at it, but it suggests that we can be much more thoughtful and intentional about the actual curriculum that we're teaching, the texts that we choose, and the way we put them in dialogue with one another to open up rigorous scholarly conversation. And we're not talking about teaching the crackpots here. We're talking about teaching credible, scholarly, expert sources and shaping those controversies. So I think that's one way to, in how you think about the actual design of your curriculum in terms of where because that's where the rubber meets the road. That's where the student experience is so critically important. And the more opportunities we provide students for that, the more practiced they're going to become, the more skilled they're going to become, the more thoughtful and I think empathetic and appreciative of complexity they're going to become. Sorry, that was a long answer.
No, no need to apologize. And before I punt this to Aaron, what you're saying makes me think of two things. One is the heightened tensions and the rancor that you mentioned earlier, that this is an antidote in many ways to turn down the temperature, especially when it feels so high. And I think the example that you gave of math, of wanting to, you're not just going to throw a student directly into advanced calculus or into calculus, and that there's foundational steps that they need to take, or the analogy of the athlete developing a muscle. I often think that I'm so appreciative that you mentioned that, because I often think that engaging in contentious topics, engaging with complexity, is a muscle that needs to be strengthened. And I know, just in conversations that I have with educators, is that's actually that's a skill that needs to start being developed in kindergarten, if not early.
Yeah.
When you think about a K to 12 or a K to higher ed arc, how do students, in a developmentally appropriate way, engage in the foundational skill building, so that when they are in high school or when they're in middle school, whether it's a social issue that they're trying to navigate, or or the complexities of geopolitics,
Yes.
that they have a foundation and something to lean on, so they're not being asked to run a marathon as soon as they learn how to walk.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and Ira, your point about developmentally appropriate, curricular material strikes me as just dead on. There's a huge difference between a 6th grader and a 10th grader and a 12th grader
Absolutely.
and a college senior, right? And I think the trick for us in the K through 12 space, and for me particularly in the high school space, is how to figure out how to pitch those opportunities for debate and dialogue and learning around complicated issues, whatever it might be.
I'm getting such a flashback to my classroom experience, and just everything you're talking about, particularly in the contemporary issues part, is just giving me a lot of waves of emotion, given the amount of current events that I had to teach. And so I'm curious, Dr. Austin, given your emphasis on discipline, nonpartisanship, let's put some practicality on this now. What advice, would you offer classroom teachers, specifically, obviously, like history, English, but any teacher for that matter, who are trying to facilitate discussions, conversations, difficult conversations in ways that sharpen both critical thinking, I would say, but also like safeguarding the student belonging?
Yeah. So some of this turns on, at what point and when is it appropriate for a teacher to share their own personal experience, their own views, their own politics, and that's an incredibly complicated question.
Well, would you argue that sharing your personal experiences?
I just lost Aaron.
So did I. I think he was asking if if you can comment on just even your personal experience.
Yeah. So the way I teach an upper level senior class on politics and political rhetoric. I tend to, and I think I'm pretty good at this. I think if you were to ask my kids, where does Dr. Austin stand on any of the given issues that we're talking about at any moment, I think they'd be hard pressed to figure out where I am, because I'm trying to create a space. So my default is not to share my own views. There's some very, very interesting studies. There was a study out of 2 psychologists out of Northwestern who interviewed 1,500 kids at Northwestern, the University of Michigan, and they discovered that something like 80% of those students in their written essays are falsifying their views so that they better conform to the opinions of the professor, right? So for that reason, I don't want the kids to know what I think about something, because they might feel impelled to game that in some ways. And I want them to do their own thinking. And so, the rule of thumb that I sometimes think about in terms of when it's appropriate for a teacher to share their own views is, I would say, probably rarely, but sometimes, but only if it creates space for more dialogue, right? So that it doesn't close things down. And ultimately, like so many things in teaching and working in schools, it's a question of judgment. And I think the more trust you're able to build in your class, the more a teacher is able to share in an honest way their own, views on a given issue, because the kids know that teacher, even when, sharing those, is still going to honor their different points of view and thinking. So, institutionally, we have a policy of not speaking on public issues unless they directly impact the mission of the school. And I think that works well, and it certainly serves me well, because I'm not expected to be an expert on every kind of issue that is on the front page of the of an American newspaper. Like I don't think Deerfield needs domestic or a foreign policy, particularly when you have students from 45 different countries. We've got, and we try to bring kids together. We have kids from Hong Kong and mainland China. And when the protests broke out there, we had infrastructure so that they could come and talk about it. So we're trying to promote connection and dialogue, but it's hard for teachers to figure out when it's appropriate.
Absolutely. No, thank you for that. It was really, really helpful to frame that. Ira and I just have two more questions, and we'll take off the hard questions on us and let everyone else ask you the hard questions. But I'm curious, are there examples from, you just mentioned a few, which are really interesting, but are there examples from Deerfield or other independent schools, colleagues of yours that have talked to you about where implementing these principles has reduced polarization or improved school climate? I'm thinking about whether it's debate clubs, student newspapers, simulations like Model UN, like ways to advance that vision of pluralism.
Yeah, I think I don't have any hard data on whether or not. I mean, it's a great question, and I'd be interested in thinking about it. I think as the head of school at Deerfield, I think our climate, and every school is different, but I think our climate gets better and better the more we try to foreground the principles of the framework. And even as the kids push back on some of them and, write editorials in our school newspaper saying that institutional neutrality is a terrible idea, Dr. Austin, what are you thinking? So I think it's created good debate on campus, and all the things that you mentioned, the kinds of simulations that kids do in MUN and Model Congress, having a newspaper on campus that's a kind of laboratory for students to be journalists is fantastic. So I think all of those ideas are really important. We've kind of doubled down a little bit on debate. We're pushing a few more resources towards our debate program, because kids learn really valuable skills of taking on positions that they have to reconstruct and imagine, and thinking about them thoughtfully. So I think debate is one area to do it, but it's my view that we have to think about this in terms of curriculum, though, because that's where the kids are, and you want to be able to reach all of the kids. And a lot of the things that we do on the sides, reach some of the kids, but not all of them. And we do a pretty robust orientation around what does it mean to be a citizen of Deerfield and a scholar. And we talk about the framework, and we talk about our norms around expressive freedom, but those are kind of one-offs until it's in the curriculum, and kids have opportunity to engage deeply. I think we need to think about that.
Thank you.
And one of the things that your remarks make me think about is that it takes a village to raise kids and to educate kids, and it takes partnership, and the way in which schools, families, broader society, etc., work together. So my last question before we get to the Q&A, both with some of the questions I saw that there are some questions coming in through the Q&A function, which if you have questions, please feel free to add in the Q&A function on Zoom, and even that came in with the pre-registration. My last question is about partnerships. How can partnerships between schools, organizations like American Jewish Committee, and broader civil society help reinforce these principles at scale,
Yeah.
across the entire educational ecosystem?
Yeah.
And the second part to this is, what do you hope today's generation of school leaders take from this framework?
Yeah. I wish I had a better answer to this one. I mean, the first thing I would say is I think conversations like this are really important. And, the framework is in some ways, it's a hypothesis to be tested. And I think the more schools are able to engage with it and talk about it and come to some sort of conclusion on their own about it, that's incredibly valuable. But, convening educators and teachers and trustees to think about these issues is incredibly important, so that there's clarity of purpose, and clarity of mission, one of the things that's been helpful for me as a head of school at Deerfield is to just continually talk about these things, and to make sure that our parents understand the approach of the school and how we think about these issues. And I think they're really appreciative of that, and they understand that. But the more conversation we can have between schools, and within schools, it is incredibly important. And the work that you're doing, facilitating schools coming together, we're just going to be smarter about these issues if we can talk with one another about them. And we get stuck in our own schools. It's inevitable. And the more opportunity we have to convene together, particularly heads of school, and to share and to think about how we're doing things, the better. One of the great upsides of the post-COVID era, I think, is that COVID forced heads of school to really talk a lot with one another, and that's continued subsequently. And so the more we can come together to share and to exchange ideas about what's working and what's not working, and what the points of tension are, the more effective we're all going to be, regardless of and all of us have different missions. So.
Thank you. And I think that's for sure. And I think the point of heads talking to one another is just like educate. I remember when I was in the classroom and when I was a school administrator, talking to other folks across schools who are in similar positions, it was incredibly valuable. And yes, I know that I can't translate one to one what happens in another school, but maybe there's a nugget of inspiration that I'm then able to implement or bring to my school. And just being able to talk shop sometimes is really helpful. I'm going to shift to the Q&A,
Great.
some of the questions that have come in, and I'm gonna go. One of the questions that came in is actually tied to something that you talked a little bit earlier, and you mentioned at the outset that the framework was crafted in the lead up to the 2024 election cycle.
Yes.
And where in October, I was about to say, I almost said October. It almost feels like we're in October already. We're nearing the end of September, where we're about to enter another election cycle, or we're already in another election cycle. Some election cycles, depending on where we are around the country, are more heated or more contentious than others. Can you dig a little bit deeper and can you offer guidance or advice to teachers as they navigate a charged election season? How can they best, where they haven't necessarily created that sense of trust where they can share their own opinion, but how can they best regulate their opinions or even their emotions when it comes to the election, and bringing when students are actually the ones who bring politics in the classroom?
Yeah.
The other side of that coin is when a classroom teacher does bring a clear, strong political bias to every discussion or to discussions, what what can students do about that?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a very, very good question. Again, I think what teachers have within their area of responsibility is the capacity to shape conversation and discussion. So, I mean, if the kids are deeply fascinated by an election, right? Maybe that teacher can think about creating a way to talk about that election in a very rigorous way. In a comparative government course, or a civics course. But I do think having those conversations within a disciplinary framework is really, really important. I think what's hard is when we try to have those conversations in in classrooms where there are low levels of trust, where the kids don't have a pre-existing rapport. I think just putting kids together randomly in one-off kind of conversations doesn't really work. I think you have to have, I think controversial topics are best explored in a classroom, which A, there's a disciplinary framework to talk about it, and B, you've had the opportunity to develop some level of trust, so kids, and rapport, so kids can have those conversations. I wish I had a better answer to them. I had a teacher at one point come knock on my door in my office and say, "John, I just want to take your advice on something." He teaches a constitutional law course, and he gives the kids a list of issues that he could create for the purposes of, he wants to give the kids some agency in choosing the issues. And I can't remember exactly how many students had filled out the poll, but something like 18 out of 21 kids in the class had the same constitutional issue as their number one choice. And the other 3 students or so had it in their top 3. And that was the recent affirmative action case. And he came to me and he said, should I do this? Like, I'm kind of nervous about this. And I said, yes, I think you should do it. And here are the reasons why. One, you're doing it within a disciplinary framework, right? You're teaching a course on constitutional law. So this is the perfect forum for it. I said, B, you are a master teacher and you actually have a law degree. So you know what you're doing. And C, the students want to talk about this. So you have the perfect positive storm here to have a constructive conversation about it. So that for me was a very interesting moment. An experienced teacher kind of stepping back and saying, I'm not sure I want to do this, even though everything was in place to have a really exciting and interesting conversation.
So kind of building off that, one of the questions we had, and this kind of Dr. Austin's ideal world, and you've kind of hit some of them, but just want to make sure you sort of answer it in full if there's anything else you wanted to add. But what is it when a school does something exemplary, like an exemplary job utilizing, say, civics to instill pride and shared purpose and country, whatever the case may be? Like, what is your ideal situation? How should a school really show exemplary civics in that regard?
Yeah, I don't know how to answer that one.
Is there a particular, is there another case study maybe that you've seen before that demonstrate, like, if you were observing a classroom, this is like a way that really I would like to see all, schools sort of emulate? Yeah.
The thing I'm most interested in, right now as a teacher, and my background is in history and English. The thing that I'm most interested now in is in curricular design. And I do think there are a lot of great models out there that teachers can explore and use to think about how to put together units of study that can build civic and intellectual resiliency and muscle. A couple I would mention, there's the kind of teach the debates school of thought that was started by Gerald Graff in the 80s during another high point of political and culture war tension. That was recently revived by Mark Edmondson in a great piece in the American Scholar called Teach the Conflicts. There's the case study method, which I've become very interested in. David Moss, who's a professor at Harvard Business School, has published a book of case studies that were written for the business school called Democracy, a Case Study. And as a curricular vehicle, it's really, really interesting, because what a case study does is it stages a detailed, complex history, and it stops it at a critical moment, and it asks the student to think through the decision point. And it has a way of just opening up young people's mind to different ways of thinking about a given question or moment of history. And there's no right answer, right? History does play itself out in a certain direction, and you can talk about where it went and why it went that direction. But that's just a long way of saying I think there's lots of great curricular materials out there that we can draw on.
So the last question I'm going to ask you before and towards the end, this is a quick preview to those in the webinar, that we will have a short feedback form that we'll post in the chat at the end. This is a question about, this is actually a perfect follow-up about curriculum design, because when you're designing curriculum, you're making intentional and sometimes really difficult choices about what to include. And for every one thing you include in a curriculum, you're excluding X number of voices, perspectives.
We've all been there. Yeah.
So on the one hand, so I'm actually combining two questions that came in through the Q&A. So on the one hand, there are there's a critique of the framework in that it could lead to intellectual relativism.
Yes.
So how do you balance the academic pluralism while honoring multiple perspectives, and at the same time providing established facts? And then to add one more layer on top of that is, what about students who then don't feel capable or invited to engage in difficult conversations because of parts of their identity, who don't necessarily feel that sense of power and agency compared to other members of other classmates of theirs? So I know that's a really weighty question, or two-part question. I will leave it to you to sort of take in either direction. And I recognize, and I'll name that, because you're choosing to go in one direction, that doesn't mean that you are negating and therefore deliberately not answering the other. It's they're both, I mean, I wish we had more time to dig in, because I think that there's a lot more to uncover.
So one question is, like, how do you
balance academic pluralism and honor multiple perspectives, and at the same time provide established facts? And I know that that's, what is the foundational knowledge, or what is the foundation from where we're building? Let's start there.
So I hate to be bibliographic about this, but the other book I would recommend to folks on the webinar is Jonathan Zimmerman's and Emily Robertson's The Case for Contention. And the reason I recommend that is they have a taxonomy of debates. They talk about different kinds of debates, expert debates versus public debates. And they're very thoughtful in terms of helping teachers think through how to craft, how to give shape to controversial issues in a way that's never complete, because these are ongoing, unbounded conversations, and you can't include all the sources that you would want, but which go some way towards opening up a space that kids can inhabit and see themselves in it. And I think the case study method does something similar. And the virtue of the case study is it provides a common body of information and fact and narrative from which students have to reason towards an informed judgment. And I think the most interesting exercises for kids are not those that result in a kind of relativistic, oh, you could do it this way or that way, but which actually ask them to come to some kind of intellectual judgment based on the facts, and be able to talk about that with classmates who have a completely different view of it, but are coming at it with the same set of facts and taking it in a very, very different direction. And I think in terms of the last question, I mean, one of the challenges is, you know, at Deerfield, we have kids from 37 states and 40 different countries. We have tremendous socioeconomic diversity. And one of the things we want to do, given our investment in that, is activating the viewpoints and the experiences of our kids, but doing it within a framework that allows them to have meaningful and authentic and fact-based, evidence-based conversations with peers. And in my experience, that can be done. So I don't know, Ira, if that completely answers your question, but
Yeah, I think it if anything, it reinforces this notion that the foregrounding and the norm setting and the culture shifting or the culture establishment, or like creating a culture
yes,
around this, just it reinforces how critical that is.
yes,
That to go in April and all of a sudden want to introduce this sort of out of nowhere is really difficult, and that it requires a lot of
yes,
forethought and a lot of that planning in order to then yield the results that you would want. And that it
yeah,
really, it both like that time investment um is going to be so incredibly critical and so
yeah,
incredibly valuable. Um, and I'll just name that you named one, and also the one other piece is the what you talked about with engaging in contentious topics also makes me think about structured academic controversies and
yes,
protocols that
yes,
I know are out there as part of
yes,
practices and pedagogies that are used in that I know I use some of them in my classroom. So
yes,
that was on the one hand, the teacher in me is feeling very reaffirmed in that moment, but right,
yeah,
but I also think that what we'll do to all the people in the webinar is we're going to follow up with everyone. There should be a link for everyone to fill out some feedback, and we're going to in our note to follow up with everyone who attended, we're going to include a link to the two sources that Dr. Austin mentioned, so that way you have them for reading and for continued learning and exploration. Dr. Austin, I want to thank you for taking the time out of a busy day of especially a busy time of the year to meet with us, to be in conversation with us, to share the framework with us and what and how it can not only equip teachers to lean into contentious topics, or not only give them the skill set to be and the tools to be able to do this, but more importantly, that students have the opportunity to build this muscle that not only they need, but also that more broadly our society is in need of. So thank you
Thank
very
you
much for
very
joining
much.
us. Thank you everyone for participating and for joining us today during this webinar. And we look forward to hearing your feedback, and we look forward to being able to offer additional programming and webinars and intellectual discourse like this um, in the future. And again, please fill out the feedback form when you have it. And again, thank you, Dr. Austin.
no, thank
Thank
you.
you so much, sir.
Fun, yeah, and I'll get you some of those sources.
We
Great.
appreciate
Thank you
that.
so much.
Okay.